This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman and our longtime Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis and 11 Alive anchor reporter Maria Martin. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And our Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So he's supposed to be a backup now? Okay, well, we'll discuss that. And is someone's time running out up in Flowery? We will discuss that as well. And we had some no-shows on Monday, but maybe we can understand why. But we promise you we will still end on a positive note because that's what we do here at the Atlanta Football Party. But first things first, we have to talk about what Terry talked about today. Jarvis, GM Terry Fontenot said today that the Falcons gave Kirk Cousins 2 years guaranteed, expecting to, quote, get high-level quarterback play. Didn't happen. But how do you think Kirk's contract situation will actually end up playing out?
I think that they're going to probably end up having to cut him because I think I don't know what the market is for a guy like Kirk Cousins, because when you think about, 13-year veteran, a guy just coming off of an Achilles injury, 14 games into the 2024 season, he gets benched and placed in favor of a rookie quarterback, with a team that is chasing a playoff spot, and eventually they end up not being able to do that. I don't know what the market is for a guy like that. Are you telling me that the Cleveland Browns are going to be interested in him because they're basically probably going to have to move on from Deshaun Watson and eat all that money, and guaranteed bread that they have up there? So I just don't know what the market is. So if Terry gets to the point where that trade market is not what he thinks it probably is, it should be, or what it's going to be, I feel like they end up having to cut him to save the little $10 million and do a post-June 1 cut or whatever, however that works out, so they can split the difference on as far as the cap hit for the next 2 years and just move on.
Yeah. And what about for you, Maria? Just what you heard today. Obviously, you were out at Flowery Branch. How do you think Kirk's contract situation will actually play itself out?
I see what Jarvis is saying because, a lot of the teams around the league are going to look at what Kirk did this year and say, like, you're seeing what I'm seeing. You're seeing what you put out there. It's just simply not good enough. Obviously, he showed us glimpses of him being a good quarterback, but not good enough to sustain the whole season.
Yeah.
The thing is, and the thing that makes it a little bit intriguing in terms of other teams, is that the market for a quarterback is always high. And to have a quarterback that can actually play any semblance of football is a prayer for a lot of teams, and a lot of teams are quarterback needy. Perhaps there's a team out there that's going to draft a quarterback where is not ready to put in like Jaden Daniels and wants him to sit. Initially, obviously that was the plan for Michael Penix, even though everyone in this front office really had, from what I understand, kind of an idea that Michael Penix was good enough to start. It's just kind of the way that the draft shook out for the Falcons. But let's say there's another team who picks up somebody who doesn't believe that they should start right away. Kirk could be that guy to give you 1 year. And the Falcons aren't just going to give him to another team, that's for sure. I also just don't believe that he is going to be the backup, no matter how many times Terry Fontenot said it in his press conference today. Yep. And I believe with everything that I have that Kirk Cousins doesn't want to do that either. And in order to make this really work, it would be putting him in another destination where, again, he could give you a little bit of football, a little bit that he believes that he has left and that everyone thinks that he does as well. So is he going to win a franchise, a Super Bowl? No, but can he help a younger quarterback get to where, he could be in the future? Absolutely. So I think that it's possible that he gets traded to another team just because so many teams need a quarterback and they come at a high premium. Hence why you paid him $100 million guaranteed.
Yeah. And I think to what both of you guys are saying. You look across the league and how many times were there situations this season, and we know last season it was 3/4 of the teams actually had to utilize their backups, right? But this backup situation would be different, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in a few moments. But I think, yeah, Aaron, there are some teams out there that, hey, if the situation presents itself, you certainly would be a backup in a situation where maybe you would actually play, because this backup situation, there would have to be something, I don't want to be dramatic, but catastrophic to take Michael Penix Jr. off the field next year, whereas you may have a situation like a Tua Tagovailoa who stays injured. And so that might give an opportunity for Kirk Cousins to play. But again, we'll talk about that in a second. More importantly here, when you look at what Terry Fontenot said today about the 2 years guaranteed, expecting to get the high-level QB play that didn't happen, how do you think the contract situation is going to play out?
Well, it's ultimately up to Kirk Cousins. The Falcons can say whatever they want to say about what they want to do and what they're prepared to do and what they're comfortable doing. But ultimately, because of the contract that Kirk Cousins negotiated, he holds all the keys, right? He has the no trade clause. So if the Falcons want to trade him, and we saw a report earlier this week that the Falcons would like to get something in return for Kirk Cousins is the person who decides whether or not that trade is going to happen. If the Falcons say, hey, we're comfortable with Kirk being a backup, but if Kirk is saying, like, I don't want to be a backup, I still can play football. I haven't forgotten how to play the quarterback position, and I feel like my services could be a starter elsewhere in the league. And basically, like, are the Falcons going to hold him hostage at $40 million as a backup? No, the answer is not. So if Kirk Cousins wants to leave Atlanta, Kirk Cousins will leave Atlanta, as Jarvis said, most likely in a post-June 1 cut sometime in March or whatever, when that timeline comes along. So ultimately, what happens with Kirk Cousins is up to Kirk Cousins. Congratulations to his agent, Mike McCarthy, for negotiating a great contract and leverage in this situation, so that if Kirk gets put out the pasture as the Falcons did this season, he still holds all the cards in terms of what his future is going to be. So ultimately, it's up to Kirk Cousins. And as Maria said, I think Kirk Cousins is going to want to play football games similar to what you saw with Russell Wilson this past year, where he got, pushed aside by the Denver Broncos and went to Pittsburgh, and now they're in the playoffs. And I'm sure Kirk is being like, hey, I can do the exact same thing, maybe with a rival team in the AFC North who happen to have the number 2 overall pick. So they also have opportunities to get Kirk Cousins or draft a quarterback if they feel like they need to go in a new direction, which we all, I think, agree that they need to go in a new direction at that quarterback position. If I'm referring to the Ohio team, that's not Columbus or Cincinnati, if you're not clear on who I'm talking about. So
very clear.
Yeah. So I think it's ultimately up to Kirk Cousins what is going to happen. And I think ultimately he will get his walking papers at some point between now and the start of the league year, and will have an opportunity to go play elsewhere in this league.
And if he does get those papers, when you look at this whole situation and you think back to where we were at the beginning of the season, JD, versus where we are now, should all the blame be placed on Terry? Because right now everybody's kind of pointing the fingers at, man, how do we get here? Whose fault is it? Who's responsible for how this happened? And you kind of look at Terry and he's saying, hey, we didn't get the high level QB play, didn't quite happen. But being in a situation where you're not in control of the fate of this contract and the future of Kirk Cousins, with or without the Falcons, do you place more of the blame on Terry and maybe signing him with this kind of contract like he did?
Yeah, I put because he's the general manager, I put most of it on him, right? But I'm not gonna put all of it, because here's the thing. I always think that, when it comes to like vision and moving forward, I always look at what general manager has to think about. They always have to think about the future, right? Because you're talking about when it comes to team building, you always got to be thinking ahead as you go along. So I feel like Penix may have been Terry's situation mostly, and I feel like Kirk Cousins may have been Raheem Morris' situation, right? Because he wants to win now. Like that first thing he came in, I want an elite processor. Well, you don't know if a rookie quarterback is an elite processor until you evaluate him, you get film on him, and you go through that whole process. Guess what you talking about elite processor? You talking about a guy that's a vet, like that's been there, done that, and seen it all, right? So I feel like, true enough, I feel Terry deserves most of the blame because for giving him that type of contract. I feel like they should have negotiated a little harder, right? Like you couldn't just no trade clause to Kirk. Like, what are we talking about here? LeBron has a no trade clause, right? That's how we doing it now. But anyway, so I think that's the reason why I don't place all the blame on on Terry, but I do feel that that was a in conjunction with each other. Has, hey man, I'm thinking about this as a coach. I know I need to win now, and I think as a general manager with Terry, he was like, hey man, I want to get my guy for the future. Because I looked at the previous general manager, and that dude doggone brought it in the face of the franchise, and that mofo stuck around for a long time, and that's what I want to do too.
Yeah. And Maria, I think about what you said as well, just in piggybacking off of what Jarvis said, but going back to what you said too. Yes, you can place some of it some blame at the foot of a Terry Fontenot, but then some of the blame you just got to place at the feet of the market, because it just is what it is when it comes to a quarterback. But for you, where do you place the blame squarely in terms of how this contract was crafted and how things are playing out so far as a result?
Yeah, I think it's hard to put all of your blame on Terry Fontenot. However, I do think he needs to take a brunt of it, as Jarvis mentioned. He is the general manager of this franchise. I think one thing that's tricky that can be good for you or bad for you is that there's so much of this collaborative effort with this team, right? They're all hitching their wagons to one another. That can pay dividends to you in some areas. However, it can completely drag you down in others. So in a situation like this, where this kind of was a really big risk, right? Take this contract on that most teams are like, hey man, I would never sign something like that. You're Kirk Cousins and Mike McCarthy, and you're looking like you fleeced the Falcons, and it's great for them. But for the Falcons, it didn't work out. And again, Terry Fontenot reiterated multiple times today, obviously this was never the plan. The plan was to have Kirk Cousins play for at least 2 years and give you a lot of really good football, playoff caliber football, all those good things. But they're nightmare scenario, which every scenario is weighed no matter what deal you're making in the NFL, clearly came to fruition for them. And I think to be successful, you always got to put forth a little bit of risk. This was a lot of risk. And I think it was dictated a lot by the market. I know that's annoying, but I really do think so, because they knew that they needed a quarterback. They were very, very excited about Michael Penix. They just didn't know if that was a Super Bowl caliber quarterback or a playoff caliber quarterback. And they said, we have this opportunity to get a 13-year veteran. Why not take a shot at that and hope it works out? So unfortunately, their biggest nightmare came true. And this is all what we're talking about, the scrutiny over this happening. If Kirk gives you 2 years, you're having a completely different conversation. Yeah. Still, with that said, he does need to take some blame. And I do think that it's impossible, which I don't think many things are impossible, but I think it's impossible to have an 8-9 season with all the expectations that you had for this franchise and there not to be some sort of change, whether it's on your staff, with the players. Players are always going to change. That's the nature of the business. But I think there has to be an answer for just how abysmal this whole thing played out. And we're going to see that in the coming days. I think Terry was asked all the right questions today, but certainly you place the brunt of the blame on Terry. Unfortunately, I like Terry. He's a great guy, but this was certainly worst case scenario for Atlanta.
Yeah. This was one of those where you think about risk reward, Aaron, and you just looked at the upside, but the risk here, it was high. I mean, it really, really was. And again, like Maria said, this was not on anybody's bingo card that this would play out the way it did the backside of the season. But on the same token, high stakes. So when you look back at how we started and how this is played out and the contract as it was, where do you sort of place the blame as to where we are now and how that contract kind of got us there?
Well, I'm going to zig while everybody else is at it. I'm going to put more of this on Raheem Morris. I think with the way that the Falcons have traditionally done personnel moves under Terry Fontenot, it's been a lot of, I think, coach-driven moves where you get all these free agent pickups that, happen to have played for Falcons assistant coaches in their previous stops. And we saw that with Raheem Morris in Washington. I think you also couple that with the simple reality of why the Falcons fired Arthur Smith, because they didn't win games. And so there was a pressure for the new coach to come in and win games right away. And that was where sort of, could you risk, dealing with a rookie quarterback and going through the rookie struggles, which is why I think that incentivized this team to go after Kirk Cousins. And I think because Raheem Morris's previous stint with Kirk Cousins, because of, coming from that LA Rams, Sean McVay working with Kirk Cousins, Kyle Shanahan working with Kirk Cousins prior to his stop in Atlanta, where Raheem worked with Kyle Shanahan. Like, all these people, I think, sort of had high opinions of Kirk Cousins, and that's coming from a coaching standpoint. Now, obviously, I think Terry Fontenot does deserve some of the blame. He's ultimately responsible for every player on this roster. I think, as Jarvis said, with the negotiation of the contract, that's more of a front office issue than the coaching issue. But then I think when you couple Kirk Cousins' arrival in Atlanta being coach-driven, as well as the fact, when we sit here and talk about why did Kirk Cousins suddenly fall off after the month of October, ultimately that's determined by what happens on the football field, and that's not really the purview of the general manager. And so ultimately this thing going south, I think, is more on the coaching staff based off of that. When we can sit here and debate all day on why do we think it went wrong with Kirk Cousins. And so I'm sure we'll spend the next 7 months talking about that. But it is one of those things where I think ultimately that does fall on the coaching staff. So it's probably like 60-40, but I think it's 60-40 on the coaching staff and Raheem Morris and 40% on Terry Fontenot.
Yeah. And speaking of the 7 months, we're going to start it on the other side talking about that very thing, because, I mean, is he really supposed to be a backup now? We'll discuss it when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. So be sure to visit the website and check out the betting lines around the league, and visit FanDuel.com today and join today. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets. How cool is that to also start the new year? So that's FanDuel.com. Check out FanDuel.com for everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL and America's #1 sports book. All right, Maria. So Terry Fontenot also went on to say he expects Kirk Cousins to move forward as the backup QB, and reiterated, quote, "We're very comfortable moving forward with Kirk Cousins as a backup." So do you think that Kirk Cousins will actually settle for being just a backup?
No, I don't. I mean, no part of me thinks that Kirk wants that. He hasn't been a backup since he was in Washington, and that was just because he was just getting into the league. So, I don't think Kirk wants that. Kirk, as Aaron had mentioned earlier before, didn't forget how to play quarterback. He mentioned that in mid-December, the last time that we talked to him. Very poignant words from Kirk, which he's never really, spicy, so to say. But I thought that was pretty much as spicy as it gets for Kirk, for him to say, look, I didn't forget how to play quarterback. That was really also a message to other teams, like, whatever the future may be with this franchise, which I'm sure it's in your head the moment that you're benched. Yeah, it's probably not going to be here next year, but because he and his agent have drafted this unbelievable, I think, commend you guys, because wow, you got a team to sign off on that, and you're getting paid a ton of money. You got a no trade clause. You have everything in your fingertips and all the control. Good for you guys. Terrible for the Falcons, but really, this was like masterclass in how to sway a team to get them to do what you want them to do. Unbelievable work by them. But no, I mean, I think that he's going to do everything in his power to make sure he's somebody else, somewhere else, and somebody else's quarterback next year. Again, tons of teams need a quarterback. Do I think they're going to take on everything that his contract has to offer? That is said to be seen. It's how desperate are you to have a veteran quarterback on your roster? But Kirk has all of the power and all of the control, as Aaron had mentioned and reminded everyone earlier, which I thought was such a good point, because if it's up to Kirk, I don't think sitting behind Mike Penix, as professional and great as he was to close out the year, and he handled that with such grace, I don't think that that's really going to translate into a whole season of sitting behind Mike.
Yeah, Aaron, it's one thing to do that for 3 games. It's another thing to do that for the entirety of the season when you know for sure that's all that's going to happen for you unless something catastrophic happens to Michael Penix Jr. So for you, do you see Kirk Cousins as settling for being a backup, especially if I can just kind of add a little bit to that, a backup for the Falcons where there's no clear-cut road to you being back at QB1?
Yeah.
No, I don't see Kirk doing that. Now, again, as I mentioned, the scenario with another team in the AFC North who has a number 2 overall pick, I'm sure Kirk can negotiate a situation where he's like, I will go to Cleveland with the expected that I will be the week 1 starter. Whether that plays out over the course of the next 18-game season in 2025 will be a different situation. So I could see Kirk accepting a backup role in another place because he understands going into that situation that is a possibility. But we know Kirk went into this Atlanta situation not expecting that the Falcons would, turn to another quarterback at any point in time, as we remember the drama on draft night where Kirk had to be informed shortly before the pick that the quarterback pick was coming, and it did not particularly sit well. And just sort of you hear all these things, and Kirk's agent, as Maria said, is done a great job. He's putting this stuff out there. He's an incredible agent. This man deserves our applause as far as being one of the top agents in the game. And so you cannot hate on them for that. But I do not see Kirk Cousins accepting a backup role here in Atlanta, especially when you consider all the context that went where, you could argue he was maybe a little bit blindsided. I remember Jarvis and I having this conversation in early May about, I don't think Kirk is particularly happy with the Falcons' decision to take Michael Penix. And I certainly don't think Kirk is happy with the Falcons' decision to bench Kirk Cousins in favor of Michael Penix. And I don't think Kirk is going to sit there and just be like, he's going to get paid handsomely regardless of what happens next year because of the contract that they negotiated. But I think he wants to go to a place where he can actually get on the field.
They haven't done anything he's wanted so far. Why would he play ball? I mean, literally the reports that he wanted to go somewhere so long as nobody drafted a young quarterback to basically sit there lurching over his shoulder. Well, that happened. And then the possibility of him getting benched was over his shoulder all year. And everyone's talking about how great Michael Penix was in training camp, which he was. But then that happened. So, and it's a business, they don't have to do right by any player, regardless of what you pay them contractually. It doesn't matter. But they really haven't done right by Kirk so far. Granted, the play spoke for itself. That's not really what I'm getting into. But why would he sit there and play ball at this point when everything that he didn't want went away?
Yeah, that's like Jarvis, you coming back and saying, okay, but I know they're going to do well by me. Look at what they did with the contract. Yeah. That's the last time that they really did well by you, if you're really thinking about it, because always you're walking away from a Minnesota Vikings situation where you're knowing that they're going to go after somebody like a JJ McCarthy. So you're like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Mm-hmm. And like Maria said, he hasn't seen any parts of being a backup in a decade. So why in the world would he revert back to something like that? I don't think there's anything that I can see or we can see that would make him want to just be a backup. But I mean, Jarvis, do you see any way that Kirk just kind of sits there and is okay with being 2 on the depth chart?
Absolutely not. And here's why Terry Fontenot said that, right? I'm saying, I got my little Terry Fontenot tweaker flags, you know what I'm saying, coming from Flowery Branch because I wasn't able to make it out there today. That man was being a politician, y'all. Do you understand? This man was standing up there doing his best political address. And he basically told the rest of the NFL, that little $10 million that kick in at in the new league year, we'll pay that. We'll pay it. We promise you we'll pay that because we in there, baby. We're in the hole. We already in there. What's $10 more million? You know what I'm saying? Because that's what kicks in the new league year. So I feel like he was just saying that to try to get some type of negotiating power with the rest of the league, because we already know what it is. Maria and Free just laid it out perfectly, right? We know what time it is. That man got no trade clause, so figure that out. But I think for him to say that they're prepared or comfortable, I know our guy Zeno, had an issue with that for whatever reason. I don't know. He was harping on him saying that. Yeah, he's comfortable because guess what? It's already been allocated, dog. The money has been allocated that, and they're more than willing to pay that to figure out what works best for them as far as how they move forward. Because a backup quarterback, Kirk, I don't see that happening with Kirk or Kirk being able to agree with that. So Terry saying that they're comfortable with him being the backup just means that, hey, we'll pay the $10 million. And so let's go ahead and figure out a deal. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's find a team to make this work so everybody can be happy. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's what that was. That's all it was. It was just a negotiating ploy to the rest of the league and Kirk and his agent, who is amazing. And we'll see if they play ball.
Yeah. So, Aaron, for you, granted, that could be an option, but Terry Fontenot said there was no validity to the reports that the Falcons are going to release Cousins when this season ends, which is an option. But when he talked about the possibility of trading Cousins, as Jarvis just alluded to, he said, quote, "We'll take those things as they come. Everyone would have to be good with it." There's a lot of layers to that, but how plausible do you think it is that Kirk will actually agree to a trade? And it may be based on who the partners are, but how plausible is that for him?
I mean, it's a non-zero chance, right? As Maria said, anything's possible, right? It's possible that me and Beyonce can get together at some point in time in the future. That's possible, but like,
that's not really what I meant when I said
for the future.
I'm just saying
she didn't mean
that. On my parade. You don't think me and Beyonce could be an item? But I'm
I believe in you, freak. I got your back, bro. I got you, bro. I believe
it was on your vision board.
It's a new year, 2025. We got New Year's resolution.
You know what? Full send. Get me some tickets while you're at it.
Right. Don't forget the little people when you come up and you become Mr. Beyonce.
You guys will be in the front row seats for that wedding. But anyway, anything's possible, but it's not going to happen. Like, as I said, like the Russell Wilson situation, I think, because again, we're talking about Kirk's agent, right? Kirk and his agent, they want the leverage, right? And you don't quite get as much leverage when you're talking trade as you would if you're a free agent where you can dictate that. So if you want the most leverage, and they have, as we've talked about, they have been great at getting leverage every single time they've been in a position to negotiate. They're going to do the thing that gets them the most leverage. And that to me is getting a release, not a trade. But it is possible if, the perfect situation comes along for Kirk Cousins and he says, like, you know what, I'm actually content with, taking the money I'm already getting paid and going to this other team, and I have assurances from that other team that they're not going to do a thing and all that stuff, then maybe a trade will happen. So again, I say a non-zero chance, but it ain't that much higher than zero is basically what I'm saying.
Exactly. Well, you know what? It sounds like we all kind of sort of think that maybe time is running out on 18. Is time running out on 8? We'll talk about that in Next Up. So, Aaron, another lightning rod from the press conference earlier today, and really from the entire season, if we're being honest about it, is Kyle Pitts. So Terry Fontenot gave his thoughts on Pitts, saying, quote, "When you take a player that high, obviously you expect a certain level. We understand Kyle had a really good rookie year, and it hasn't equaled that since then. But there are no excuses that we're making about it." And like I said, he's been maybe one of the lightning rods, if not the lightning rod, because you're looking back at him, the 2021 draft, first round draft pick, number 4, highest tight end ever taken, ... And the productivity just has not been there. So for you, based on what Terry said today, did you feel like that was maybe a foreshadowing that this is the beginning of the end of KP's time as a Falcon?
I don't think Terry said anything that really hints us one way or the other. I think as we get further along, we'll get more context clues to define. Like, to me, the whole notion of, is Kyle Pitts going to be back in 2025 with the Atlanta Falcons? That has been a 50-50 proposition for the last month or so. So I don't know if I feel like, oh, he's definitely gone now based off of what Terry said. I think there's a path to reconciliation at this point for Kyle Pitts and the Atlanta Falcons. But if I was a betting man, I would bet that we've seen Kyle Pitts play his last game in Atlanta.
That's so funny, Jarvis, because, on Mondays and Thursdays, we also say the Atlanta football party is known as therapy. So, when Aaron said reconciliation, I was like, oh, okay, so I guess they need to go to the couch and have some commentary about whether or not Kyle Pitts has seen his last days as a Falcon. But do you see that there were any breadcrumbs that were put out there, or any tea leaves today, or even, I'll say, back a couple days ago when Raheem Morris spoke to to the press on whether or not Kyle Pitts has seen his last days as a Falcon?
When you have a general manager come out and say the number 4 overall pick from the 2021 draft hasn't been good enough, he's had one good year since he's been here, and there are no excuses for it. He understands that, yeah, you aren't in the conversation to re-up a contract, but guess what though? We ain't got that many draft picks this year. And since my phone is going to be on for 18, I can let you know that my phone will be on if you call with me, say, hey, I want 8. If you want 8 comes up in my call ID, I'm going to answer that phone. And we're going to have a conversation, because Aaron and I talked about this, I believe, on Locked On Falcons. Like, if a team comes and says, makes that phone call, a contender's like, you know what? We don't need our 3rd round pick this year. You know what? This mid to late 3rd round pick that we have at the team. You know what, Terry? Let's go ahead and take Kyle Pitts off your hand. We'll figure it out. We have more than enough to make that situation right. And I think that a third round pick would be more than enough compensation for them to do the deal, because I feel like that sobering comment, it just made it seem like, hey, there are no real like affection towards Kyle Pitts like it was when they first drafted him, right? After that rookie year, I'm sure Terry was like, yes, this is about to be it. This is about to be the dude. And then they started figuring out, hey, character questions. Does he really want to be great? Why are we always hearing his teammates talking about, hey, if this dude just runs fast, or just run his routes right, or if he just works with this guy, or if he does this, he'll be amazing. We're still saying that in year 4. And so I feel like it's business right now, because his feet are on the fire. Like, I don't think anyone can disagree with me on that. His feet are to the fire. So if somebody makes that call and says, you know what, let's have a conversation about 8, and I feel like Terry would be more than willing to listen, so he can try to recruit some of those draft picks that he sent for a guy that they ain't do jack.
Yeah, Maria, when you think about it, right, he said he understands Kyle had a really good rookie year, and it hasn't equaled that since then. And yeah, you look at the numbers, and of course, 110 targets, 68 catches. And it was interesting to me, because as I look back at the numbers, I thought, because he had the flashes he did, by the way, this year, that maybe his numbers were better than last year. And it's like, no, you actually, in every area except touchdowns, he had 4 this year, 3 last year, it pretty much declined. So I thought that commentary was very telling without being telling. But what do you think about where Kyle Pitts lands come the 2025 season?
I think everybody knows how I feel about Kyle Pitts, and I've been
I've been
very critical of Kyle over the 4 years that he's been here. Kyle, I think the expectation, obviously, when you take a tight end, the highest ever at 4 overall, the expectation is exactly what Terry said. You don't draft a tight end like that for him to have the production that he does. You draft him to be otherworldly. You draft a running back as high as you drafted Bijan for him to be Bijan freaking Robinson. Yes. And so you understand that, some of these offensive pieces that Terry has picked up in his tenure here, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, like, those have worked out for you. Those are very good players. And Drake, I think, the sky is the limit for Drake once he finally, poor Drake, gets a quarterback that can really get him the ball, which I think that we've all found that now. Kyle he's had an array of quarterbacks, multiple coaches at this point, a lot of different scenarios, different schemes, and it's still not working. Yeah. You've seen other players go somewhere else and it work out for them. And maybe that's what he needs. Maybe he needs a change of scenery. Maybe he needs something like that. But if you're going to hitch your wagon to somebody at the 4th overall pick at that position, he better be otherworldly. And Kyle, honestly, and I've said this multiple times, Kyle has all of the ability to be otherworldly. He has everything at his fingertips. He's the perfect specimen for a tight end. He does everything right, except for when it comes to playing football on the field. And again, maybe it's a change of scenery that he needs. I don't have a good enough sample size of him in Atlanta to make me feel confident that his time here needs to be extended. I think that he probably does need a change of scenery at this point. It's just simply not working. And Terry Fontenot kind of just echoed, I think, what a lot of people have thought for a very long time with Kyle.
Yeah, and I think speaking of Drake London and how they both kind of weather the storm, it's kind of a juxtaposition because in Kyle Pitt's case, you may think, oh, we can be optimistic because, hey, maybe this will be the right offensive coordinator for him. Maybe this will be the right tight end coach or the right offensive coaching staff for him to ascend. Right. You got a QB, like we've started to put the pieces around. So yeah, you're going to be that guy. And it didn't happen. Whereas Drake London, he's gone through some iterations of coaches as well and a quarterback as well. And he just keeps ascending and he keeps finding ways to make it work for him. So I think juxtaposing how those two have managed through the same situation is a really, really powerful example of, for me as well, why I wouldn't be surprised and would be okay if the Falcons said, hey, we've got to move on. And we started to see some uptick when the Falcons decided to use Charlie Werner in some different ways as opposed to just using him as a blocker. There's some opportunity there. So yeah, I think that as much as I actually like KP as a human, but as much as I like him as a human, I do not like him as a football player because you, with all your potential, but no actual seeing results from that potential, the Falcons just don't have the time for that. They're just out of time for that. And speaking of that, let's switch gears real quick and talk about something else that, they're kind of out of or running out of time for, because like we all said earlier, you can't lay all the blame at the feet of Terry Fontenot, whether it's a Kyle Pitts, a Kirk Cousins, or whomever. And you look at those aspirations that Raheem Morris talked about at the beginning of the season running the South, really, it only felt like they kind of ran out of gas. So based on what Coach Raheem Morris commented about during his presser, and now that we have heard from Terry, switching gears there, Aaron, do you feel like Raheem Morris kind of has been contrite enough and understands what his part is, or needs to be more contrite about how this season actually turned out?
I mean, look, I can't speak for all the fan base, but like ultimately at the end of the day, like Raheem Morris sitting here and apologizing about how the season, like it's not going to do anything for me personally. Like, okay, cool, man, great. We all saw it. Right. I don't need you to apologize to me about how the season was disappointing to me. I need you to go out there and do the things in the off season to make sure that next season is not disappointing. So that to me is really where I'm focused on. But if other people feel better, if they, get a better night's sleep because Raheem Morris comes in front of the media and says, I'm sorry, and the season didn't go the way that it did, and hey, I should have used those timeouts, and hey, I should have done this and all that stuff. If that makes you feel better, great. Awesome. Do whatever you need to do in order to feel better about yourself. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't need Raheem Morris to get trotted out in the media over the next week or later this offseason at the combine to basically apologize, do apology tour. Like, who cares? Just go out there and win football games. And ultimately, that's all that matters.
I'm with you on that, Free. Like, I don't give a damn about how sorry you are. Like, okay, yeah, like it's like you said, we saw the mistakes, right? We can pinpoint them. The no timeouts in the Commanders on the road. Sticking with a kicker that you probably should have gone out and found a better one. I know really good kickers aren't available around that time of year, but they're probably, Rodrigo out here politicking for a job, you know what I'm saying?
I want Rodrigo so bad. Y'all.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just too easy, Maria. Like, it's too easy, right? He's a Georgia Bulldog, which they don't really care to draft him. They'll draft him low.
At least not high.
You know what I'm saying? They'll get the low-level guys in there. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Quarterback all the way to Keem Dick. Yeah, I put that one out on you. Free. How about that? But yeah, I think this is one of those instances where I don't really care about coaches apologizing. I mean, I appreciate it, right? I respect it for you admitting that to your mistakes, but I'm more big on like, hey, man, what are we going to do about it? Like, that's my whole thing, because like if you are sitting up here telling me there was a time period where you got involved and that defense got exponentially better, as far as rushing the passer, right? And you saw AJ Terrell actually being excited playing football. You know, like, oh man, I get to play man coverage. I get to follow guys. Oh, I can do that. Oh, it took an extension, you know what I'm saying, for me to, you know what I'm saying, to be able to go follow my guy around so I can, you know what I'm saying, so I can start getting actually earning my paycheck, right? I just, and then you go from that, and then you go back to the means, you know, to the median, as T put it, on Atlanta Football Party on Monday. Like that tells me that you fell back and wanted to allow Jimmy Lake to do the job. Now it's time for you to make that change.
Yeah.
It's time to make that change. You gotta look in the man in the mirror and say, you know, man, all these Michael Jackson references. Anyway,
Don't do it.
it's time to look at the man in the mirror and make that doggone change. You know, and say, you know, yeah, I probably shouldn't have hired 2 first-year coordinators, because guess what? I am so fine with Zach Robinson being offensive coordinator for as long as he possibly can, because we know how good offensive coordinators get snatched up, you know, around this time of year. So yeah, that's how you apologize. My bad for hiring Jimmy Lake. Let me go and get him up out of here.
All right. Well, I don't know how to follow that up, but basically, I think that I think raw apologizing is honestly just a formality at this point. You know, just trying to say something to the fans to make sure that the fans don't totally jump ship, like I think a lot of them wanted to, probably by week 16. And I get it. It's been a roller coaster of a season, and so I understand. So maybe just one blanket apology was what a lot of people needed to hear. As Free said, like, you do you. If you need an apology, great. But I thought that it was very important that Terry got up there and reiterated multiple times. It doesn't matter what I say up here. I can say everything under the sun about how we didn't win enough games and this, that, and the third, and I'm sorry. And bottom line is we didn't win enough games, and we have to stop talking about it. We have to actually put results onto the field. And Terry Fontenot has not had a winning season since he's been the general manager here. This team has not gone to the playoffs for 7 straight years. Like, that is not good. And so I think if you say sorry over and over, it's just, it falls on deaf ears. Sorry is not going to cut it. Figure it out in the offseason. Let's get this team to a winning franchise, please. We're begging you.
Yeah, because the record and the commentary miss us with all of that. Just have some results. No shows on Monday. But you know what? We understand. We'll discuss it on the other side. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Gametime. You know, I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a game last year where the energy, the excitement, unforgettable. It was the Bayou Classic actually it was the year before that, 2023. Got to remember we're in 25. But I was able to get some really great tickets using Gametime. So Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, like I mentioned, it worked for me with that particular game, and I'm hoping with some concerts coming up in the future, some really cool concerts that are coming up in Atlanta this year, that I'll be able to use it again. And they now have the super deal, and that's really impressive because it offers great seats at unbeatable prices, and the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. That part. And when you win, you get paid instantly, because that's a win for all of us, right? So anyway, the guesswork is what you can take out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today, because what time is it? It's game time. All right, guys. So this was kind of interesting. You may read into it, you may not. But Jarvis, of the 4 Falcons team captains, Grady Jarrett was the only one who spoke with the media on locker cleanout day. What does that say to you, if anything, that Kirk Cousins, Jake Matthews, Jesse Bates, the other captains, didn't make themselves available?
I'm not surprised that Grady Jarrett was the only one, because that's just how
it's just great.
DJ is. Like, man, He's going to talk. He's used to talking in down moments, which is so unfortunate for him to say. And hopefully he can
Yes,
get this
bless
man in the
his heart.
playoffs
Because it's
before
always been a
he
down moment.
has to sit
he's been
down.
talking.
Right. So, but I think Jake not speaking is interesting because, Jake has always been amenable to the media. He's always been a guy to stand up there and, he's been here just as long as, as Grady. He's had to answer some really hard questions, in his career as a Falcon as well. So I don't want to read too much into it, but I do think that when you think about it, made me think about Jake's career, right? Like that man is, I think it was 178 starts consecutively. I may be wrong on that.
Something in that
But
wheelhouse, yeah.
Yeah, it's somewhere in that area. It just makes me think that, man, it got me thinking like, okay, when are you gonna start thinking about a potential replacement? I'm just saying he's been stable. I'm not saying his play fell off this year, but when you start thinking about, a tackle, right? If he's a guy that can play both, he can play right tackle because and Caleb McGarry is still struggling with pass protection, you know what I'm saying, against Jadeveon Clowney, who ain't really no pass rusher like that. He was struggling still, so I feel like it I don't want to look too much into it, but it did make me start thinking about Jake Matthews, like projection as far as going forward. Like you got to start thinking about potentially replacing the guy that has just been a stalwart for you at the left tackle spot.
Yeah, I think that one was an interesting one for me as well, because it did feel like, well, you know what? Is that kind of I don't want to say a beginning of the end, Maria, but kind of like a reflective moment for him where maybe he's starting to think about that as well. But yeah, to be exact, guys, 161, it's crazy. Consecutive games for Jake Matthews. And that one was interesting. I'll talk about my thoughts on the others in a minute, but for you, Kirk Cousins, Jake Matthews, Jesse Bates not talking to or making themselves available for the media. What did that say to you?
Well, let me clarify a couple things because I was there, and I think the fans don't really understand what our locker room policy is now. It was changed halfway through the year. So traditionally, you could go into an NFL locker room, interview them at their locker, no issue, especially throughout the week. And the Falcons have a brand new, beautiful, huge locker room. There's tons of space for everybody. It's awesome. Our media policy had changed halfway through the year to where we are now required to go into the locker room, ask the guys if they will speak to us. In turn, we have to walk outside of the locker room to a hallway at the facility in the hallway. So it does require a little bit of extra steps for the guys. But it's up to them to tell us yes or no and be helpful with us trying to do our jobs as well. But that's another hurdle, obviously, having to go pull them out of the locker room into this hallway. So I never saw Kirk. He was in the building. Someone told me he was in the building, but he never actually physically entered the locker room when we were allowed in there. I was not surprised by that. In fact, I totally get it. So I didn't expect to speak to him at all. I did see Jesse. I saw him for a split second. I did not ask to talk to him. Apparently other people did, and he turned them down. And then I never saw Jake at all, which I thought was honestly a little surprising just because, Jake has been there forever as the screen goes off behind me. Jake obviously has been there forever. He's always been so wonderful, with us as the media. I don't have anything bad to say about Jake, certainly, but I did kind of expect him to put a bow on what was a chaotic year. You would love to hear from someone who's been with the franchise for a really long time. Jesse's been known to do that from time to time, not saying he's a bad leader. I think he's the perfect captain for this team. Just sometimes he doesn't want to talk, and okay, it's all good to me. So I didn't really read too much into it. I always expect Grady to do what he does, take us to church and some of the things that he's saying, and he certainly did that. I lofted a very easy, simple, not profound question. Just give me your emotions after another year where you guys are missing the playoffs and you're frustrated. And I put it on my timeline at work, and it was 3 minutes and 38 seconds. One answer. So Grady is very good in that way and so professional. I don't think that takes away from the other captains. I don't want to read too much into it, but I wanted to paint a very clear picture of our locker room policy, because a lot of people on social media were asking, what's with the hallway? Like, why are you guys not in the locker room? That's not up to us. That's up to the Falcons. And so that does create another hurdle to try to get these guys outside.
Yeah. And anything for you, Aaron, when you heard that two long timers like a Jake Matthews, or Jake Matthews as a long timer Grady Jarrett is a long timer. Grady speaks, Jake doesn't, Jesse doesn't, Kirk doesn't. Did that say anything to you, or did you feel some type of way about that?
I mean, obviously, you want to hear from the leaders on the football team. So
and both sides of the ball too, no doubt.
Yeah, but basically, what I'm hearing is Maria is basically saying that if she had spoken to Jesse Bates, he would have spoken specifically to her, and that's basically what.
That's what I said.
Yeah, that's basically
honestly what is with you today. First of all, you
That's
took
exactly
what
what I
I
heard.
said
So,
earlier
yep.
out of context and said all of a sudden you're marrying Beyonce, and then all of a sudden you said that I said something I never said.
I mean, you're just saying that Jesse Bates would have spoken to you if you would have
This
requested.
is what it's like talking to people on Twitter, by the way. You say one thing and they're like, this is what you said. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I don't really care. I don't really care. It is what you want to hear from the players, but at the same time, it's like, all right, we'll talk. Well, Jesse's coming back. I hope Jake is coming back because Lord knows you starting Michael Penix with a brand new left tackle. Good luck with that. I hope Jake's coming back. So at some point we'll get to talk to these guys. So it's no big deal that we didn't get to talk to them in January.
If they had Penix Sewell, that'd be okay. Lynn Jake will go.
I knew that was coming. I was like, cue up Jarvis with Penix. Like in my soul, I felt that coming. In my sanctified soul, I felt that coming.
You know how I feel about linemen, though. You know what I'm saying?
I know. Bless your heart.
Yeah.
You need a hug. I know. You still need a hug about that Penix Sewell situation. But yeah, I was fine with it. Like you said, Maria, Grady's going to be Grady, and he's going to give you all that you need and want, and then some. And the only thing I think would have been good to hear from Jake Matthews, because you got to hear from the OG on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe hearing from the OG on the offensive side of the ball would have been nice, but not necessary, because again, all four of these guys have always been really respectful to the media. And I think Jesse Bates, a couple of the reporters who did request him, did actually confirm that he was very respectful in saying, hey, thanks for all you guys and what you've done for us this season as far as coverage. But respectfully, I would like to decline. And everybody was very respectful to him. So yeah, I don't know that there's anything that we can read into that other than they're about as fed up as the fans, and they just are over the 2024 season and just want to move the hell on.
Sometimes you don't want to talk. Like, it's fine. Like, they have their right to say no. I mean, if you consistently, if you say no every single time that we ask you, that's a different story.
Yeah, that's a different story, right?
But if it's at the end of a season where the last two games were overtime losses with playoff implications and you're just freaking over it, like, fine, whatever. I get it.
I'm absolutely done with this. But hey, guys, as much as we have been pontificating on all the negative things that have come out of the branch this week, and heck, for that matter, this season, we're going to actually end this show on a positive note when we come back. All right, Aaron, since you were skipping through the tulips with positivity about being the next Mr. Beyonce, we're going to start with you with a positive commentary.
What a visual. Tulips with Beyonce and Free is like the most unbelievable visual. Anyway, continue.
AKA Mr. Knowles.
Yeah, Mr. Knowles. So for you, we're going to be positive. We're going to try our best to end it on a positive note for everybody and look at some encouraging things that we saw, whether that was the last game of the season or whether you want to take it through the entire season overall. Give me maybe 3 encouraging things you saw on offense.
Michael Penix and the way that he played. I think that goes without saying. Bijan Robinson looked great on offense. I'll just go for the low hanging fruit. Let's go with Drake London, looking great. They got 3 young core players that they can build around. We'll see what else they can build around. Elsewhere. But yeah, those 3 guys look great.
I like. What about for you, Maria?
Well, this is annoying because this is everything I want to say.
Yeah,
could I flip up the order? No, if I could put Bijan Robinson at every single one of those, I would. He's just like a once in a lifetime player. He's so special. I just adore covering him, and I like everything about watching him on Sundays. It's so special to be around. I hope that's never lost on people, because being around this team is pretty hard sometimes. And Bijan Robinson, don't lose sight of what he's doing. It is phenomenal. So Bijan, Michael Penix, he's certainly the quarterback of the future. That was validated in the 3 games that he played. He's so good. He's making throws that other players can't in the NFL, quite simply. And then maybe I'll go a different route here. The offensive line was a little bit of up and down, as Jarvis likes to, pull us all around when it comes to linemen, but I do think that there's some positive things that had happened, towards the back half of the year. So build upon that a little bit. So yeah.
You were
I'm
in
gonna
my
go
head
with
with that one, but Jarvis, I'll let you go first.
I don't have a three-piece, because I can agree wholeheartedly with Maria and Free with that assessment. I'm more so leaning towards like Zach Robinson in his first year calling plays. Like I feel like that was a big time thing for me because, like I said, I thought it was something that Raheem, hired 2 first-year play callers. And I know all those guys were in the same building. They kicking it like, yeah, man, when I get a head coaching job, boy, you gonna be my DC, you gonna be my OC, all that stuff. I get that. But oh my gosh, the fact that Zach came in, there were some questions about the play calling in that first game, against the Steelers. I know TJ Watt still giving me nightmares. I know Free is too. You can tell by the look on his face right now. For those who watch it on video, that's what I'm telling y'all on audio. But I think Zach Robinson, how he evolved throughout the season, and then I don't think people are talking about this enough. What he was able to accomplish with a quarterback who had not thrown to his go-to guys in 3 games, we saw Michael Penix evolve really well. It even made me start thinking about the Desmond Ridder piece, like those last 4 games, how he ain't throwing anything and turn the ball over. Oh yeah, even though he threw one that a guy dropped, that was right in his hands. But anyway, and people took those 4 games and said, "Oh my gosh, Desmond Ridder is gonna be fine." But this is different. This is so different because when you talk about the continuity that we saw game by game between 9 and 5. Oh my gosh. I think people I know for a fact, Drake London shut up a lot of people. A lot of people were saying that he wasn't a wide receiver 1. There were people saying that. People actually fixed their mouth to say things like that. So I think he's wide receiver 1 now, and you got QB 1 now. And I think the fact that connection is going to be around for at least the next 3 or 4 years. Oh man, I'm super excited about that. I'm just talking about just from a salary standpoint because you ain't gonna be able to pay everybody because Bijan gonna have to get paid too. So we'll figure that out when we get there. But for the next 3 or 4 years, yes. But for now, yes, I love seeing that from the offense this year.
And I'm just going to go in a slightly different direction. Although I agree with everything and everyone that you guys have thrown there. I really like the fact that we had such a great opportunity over the last several years to talk about the guard play for Chris Lindstrom. Nice that we're seeing Matthew Bergeron take that uptick in that growth as well. Because when you're talking about, like we said, that left-handed quarterback, being able to say that line is starting to kind of level out on both sides, I think is good. So I just kind of wanted to throw Matthew Bergeron out there as someone who encourages me with his improvement. And I know we didn't get to see it as much as we would have wanted, maybe due to injury. But in addition to having a Drake London, I think it'll be good for Michael Penix Jr. potentially to also have some weapons like a Darnell Mooney or Rondell Moore for next year. So I just kind of wanted to throw those out in terms of being encouraging for next year. Real quick, we'll only have time for one on the defensive side of the ball, but we're going to start with Aaron, then Maria, Jarvis, because it's defense will let you end us because we know that's where you want to end. So go for it, Aaron. Give me one encouraging thing where you're like, all right, we might be able to build off that for 2025.
I'll go with Arnold Ebiketie. I thought the way that he played over the last 10 games of the season. Oh, did I steal yours, Maria? Oh, so sorry. Thank you.
Mine too, darn it, but okay.
I think his play down the stretch, the question going into the season was like, could he be not necessarily a Batman for their pass rush, but could he be a Robin? And I think down the stretch, I think he looked more and more like a Robin, a guy that when you can give him those one-on-ones that a Batman in theory on this pass rush couldn't give you, he took advantage of those one-on-ones pretty consistently over those last 8 to 10 games. So I think that's really encouraging for this Falcons pass rush.
Okay, since you went AK, I guess I'll pick somebody else. So I'm gonna pick Caden Ellis because
Yes.
everyone knows I
first
adore
time.
Caden, and I think that they've started to figure out what Caden is really good at. He's able
Yes.
to rush the passer very consistently, which I think is very encouraging to see. Caden is such a versatile player; you can kind of play him wherever you want. But I think figuring out his strengths, which is what they did in the back half of the year, sky's the limit for Caden. He's so underrated in the NFL. I have no idea. Actually, I do. I was going to say I have no idea why they don't talk about him nationally. It's because he's on an 8-9 team that's missing the playoffs. If he were on a different team, Caden would be a Pro Bowler. He would be all of those things. Caden is certainly very encouraging and always will be for me.
Yeah.
For me, I'm gonna have to go with my guy Zach Harrison, defensive lineman.
Wow.
Shocking, right? I think this is a guy that at times when I was watching 96 play, I thought that, man, this guy probably needs to be a front of the rotational guy, front of the rotation guy, maybe even a starter, because just with the length, playing in this style of defense and him putting on that weight and actually looking like he got better as a player. That's one thing. When you add weight or take down, lose weight coming into a season, there's always that potential that your play might fall off because you don't know how to necessarily adjust mentally and physically about being able to carry it. But he seemed like he carried it well this year. Even got a block punt. Like that's some athletic type stuff. So yeah, I feel like that's a guy that really further solidified his draft position and his value to this team going forward on the interior of this defense.
And I'm going to sneak in one other one and another one. But I'm going to go with AJ Terrell because a lot of times players get contracts and their play just falls off and his just continue to evolve. And I think everybody that you all mentioned, including AJ, those players were put in the right positions to succeed and excel. And I think if you get the right coordinator to work with them next year, we can actually see them have even better years next season. But I would be remiss.
Had a little phlegm in my chest.
Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my guy because I also thought that an encouraging sight for me was the uptick on how special teams played. So my guy, Marquise Williams, I got to give him a shout out for doing his thing and getting his group back on the right path. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen, along with his occasional guest analyst, Jarvis Davis. And check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive, where I'll be your guest analyst this week. So it's going to be a movie. You should check it out. We'll see you guys next time.